So, if you've also been keeping a weather eye on what the Brexiteers have been up to recently, because they've been quite quiet for a period of time. However, with Trump now re-entering the White House, all of a sudden, they've come scurrying out of the shadows, out of the woodwork, like the cockroaches they are, to start spewing, of course, more and more nonsense about how wonderful it would be if, we do this fantastic trade deal with America. But we all know what that would mean. Everyone knows what that would mean. And a trade deal with the US would be so toxic once the details would come out. And bear in mind, the US would insist that all this stuff is done behind closed doors until the seal has been put on the dotted line. And at that point, there's no going back after that. It's harder to get out of a trade deal than it is to leave the EU. Like I say, we're going to find that certainly with Australia in a couple of years' time. Thank you very much, Boris Johnson. But back to this. There has been now a lot of push from the Brexiteers. And what's even more insidious is that the Heritage Foundation and a lot of Brexiteers are now starting to come together. So the Brexiteers are trying to push and influence like the Trump team, and then the Heritage Foundation, which is already inside the Trump team, also pushing the Trump team to do this deal. Why are they trying to do this? Well, for the longest time, they have seen in America the NHS as like the ultimate evil. Like, how can we continue to preach about how good our health system is, where the terrible health outcomes are beaten by something like the NHS? They would love to destroy the NHS, and getting a trade deal with America, which would absolutely open up the NHS to American healthcare companies, and God knows whatever else they would insist, is quite dangerous, incredibly dangerous. Not only that, we would be forced to lower our standards on a whole range of products. And the British people would not accept that. We saw the whole thing about chlorinated chicken when it was mooted that maybe Boris might do a deal with Trump on this. And it became such a toxic issue, they even backed off from it. However, interestingly enough, today, we are now going to look at insiders in the Trump administration who are now starting to say that they have the UK over a barrel and that they can pretty much foist whatever terms they want upon the UK, which, again, incredibly worrying if that is going to be their attitude going into a trade negotiation or starting any potential trade negotiation with the UK, to which I have always said, if anything like that happens, Storm Donald is only going to push us ever closer to the EU. And you will see in some of these comments that there is just absolutely this zero idea that the UK may turn around and just go, no, we're going with the EU. Like, there is just this zero idea and concept that the UK has a choice, or no acknowledgement that actually the UK has a choice between these two. And you'll see in a moment just the sheer arrogance that is going on from some of these insiders that have put these comments down. So over we go to the Independent in a moment. However, before we do that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and of course subscribe button down below. There is, of course, the Patreon page, the Pony Club, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, you can hit the like and share button on the way out as well. So, as always, thank you very much for everyone who does help and support the channel that way. And now, on with the show. So, over we go to the Independent. This title is Trump has Starmer over a barrel on a trade deal with the UK, now facing economic turmoil, insiders now claim. So, Donald Trump's new administration believes it has Keir Starmer's government over a barrel on a trade deal as Britain now becomes increasingly reliant on a US deal, insiders have now told The Independent. Senior sources in the president's team say that the UK had no choice but to seek a trade agreement after the Prime Minister said that the government's success would be judged primarily on economic growth. So they're already saying, as you can see, you've got no choice but to come to us. Well, no, we don't. We can go to Europe. We can go to Europe. With Britain's relations with the EU very much strained, of course, following Brexit, and only now a modest investment deal secured by Reeves' recent trip to China, one Trump aide said it was, quote, time to remind Starmer who holds all the cards in this relationship. So instantly, there is like, well, you have to come to us. And it's just like, no, we don't. No, we don't on this. Anyway, this comes now as the new Trump administration is now considering its threat over rejecting Lord Mandelson's credentials as the UK ambassador to the US. So this would be, I think, a first. I think this would be a first, at least as far as I am ever aware, of the US rejecting a UK ambassador. So we'll see what happens on that. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they reject him. So there has also been a very bruising experience over the attempts to hand over the Chagos Islands before the inauguration, which the UK government was forced now to back down on. Again, Chagos Islands. This has been stopped by the US. We said we're going to hand it back to them, and now this has been forced pretty much to be handed over to another, because of America, because they want that base in the Pacific. They want that, that base there, essentially against China. It's the only reason they have it, and they're worried now that, if they gave this up, China will get that base instead. Oh no. Well, why not do a deal with the Chagos, I can't remember who we're giving it back to now, but yeah, we're giving it back to not the Maldives. But the country we're giving it back to, that should be between the US and them, not us. And we're even following international rules on this of like giving this island back. But I think Starmer should just play hardball in this and just say, no, we're giving it back. So the US has, of course, long wanted the UK to lift its ban on chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef as a move now former UK ambassador to the US, Kim Darroch, has now warned would absolutely destroy British farming. And it would absolutely destroy British farming. At the weekend, Keir did concede that he did want some kind of trade deal with America, while the UK Chief Treasury Secretary Darren Jones said that there was, quote, plenty of good deals to be done. But worryingly for Downing Street, Trump has now used his presidential acceptance speech to repeat his plans to plow ahead with tough tariffs. And we've said this since the beginning. This will just ends up pushing us back to Europe. It's inevitable at this point. Starmer cannot continue thinking that it being a good idea being outside of Europe. That's where we are. There's a lot more better deals to be done in Europe and with Europe, shall we say, than with America. Andrew Hale, another senior analyst of the highly influential Heritage Foundation think tank, again, where it said, again, the Heritage Foundation and the Brexiteers teaming up, what could possibly go wrong? This think tank, which of course did help draft Project 25, a document that the Trump administration has now been using as a blueprint for policy. He said that Trump has now got Starmer over a barrel. The UK economy is contracting. There is no growth. The Starmer government has now doubled down on failed economic policy pledges of Jeremy Hunt and the past Conservative prime ministers. They need to give up now on their tried and failed policies and punitive taxes and borrowing, reckless spending. The UK now is bankrupt. So again, it's not bankrupt. I also remember how he said here, Conservative prime ministers. So let's say we're in an alternative universe and somehow Rishi Sunak won. They would be saying this about Rishi Sunak. Make no mistake, they would be saying this over Rishi Sunak. And this, I think, this quote here should be setting off alarm bells in the Conservative movement that actually you ain't going to get a fair shake from Mr. Trump either. The only people who are celebrating are the Brexiteers and Reform, who think that this is all somehow fantastic because Clacton's going to get American tourists. There you go. So this continues. So the Trump administration is in, of course, a position to offer a free trade agreement. This would, of course, be a lifeline to the UK economy. But Starmer and his band have done everything they can to now offend President Trump, and is now being tariffed as a form of economic sanction if they are going to realign economically with China, now a foreign adversary. So if they do that, well, hey, Europe, we could rejoin the customs union. We could maybe, I don't know, try and rejoin, the single market, do the Norway style, agreement that they've got. We could maybe even do what Ukraine is doing and try and go for the an association agreement. Maybe we could even end up, I don't know, doing our own type of deal. Who knows? But ultimately, because of this, and you can see this, we're going to end up being pushed back into the EU. It is just impossible. It's not to. And even if they go and they say no and it'll do all this punitive damages, then this just proves everything that we were saying since 2016 were right. That we should have never have left the EU, that the EU is where we belong. It is where our main economy is sort of attached to, still is, even post-Brexit. Why did we leave it? We left it on these promises that it would be jammed tomorrow. And, this American trade deal would be absolutely fantastic. So, Trump's team has now suggested that the UK's flirtation with Beijing is now a flawed attempt to create some kind of leverage by setting up China as a potential fallback. Again, not happening. Because I think there's again a full deal, like a full trade deal with China, again, not going to happen. Not going to happen at all. There will be too much, again, damage, I think, done there. Regulations, of course, would also be an issue as well there. Of course, we're still aligned with the EU on a whole issues of stuff there. Whole stuff going on there that is again, it's not going to happen. And yeah, Reeves did get some investment. It's not a lot, but hey, it's some. But there's a heck of a lot more deals we could do if we were in, the EU. So one source at Mar-a-Lago said that they are now literally using China as a paper tiger. They want us to believe that they will now fall back on China as an alternative if they cannot get a trade deal with us. This is ludicrous thinking. Nobody in here is taking it seriously. But the trips by the senior officials just made it look as though Labour's instincts were wrong, which they are. It had also been noted that the $600 million investment that Reeves came back with from China was, quote, peanuts. Trump's team has now been advised by Brexiteers in the UK, as well as trade expert and think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, that the economic alignment with the EU will not work for Britain. Again, you've got to think about this. Brexiteers, free market fundamentalists saying, oh yeah, this dynamic alignment with the EU, not going to work. But all our businesses want to be aligned and keep following EU rules and regulations. But dynamic alignment with the EU, not going to work. Meanwhile, our businesses will be able to keep trading with Europe because we follow the same rules and regulations. Yeah, totally not going to work, the Brexiteers and the Heritage Foundation, what could possibly go wrong? Anyway, they said that the EU will, of course, not save Britain, even if it wanted to. The senior source said, if true, this was now render all the aims of Keir Starmer's much vaunted reset with the EU pointless. Mr. Hale, who now specializes in trade at the Thomas A. Rowe Institute of Economic Studies in Washington, said that the UK needed a trade deal very quickly. He said everyone in Washington knows that Starmer and his team would prefer realignment with the EU as opposed to the US. But Given the slow process of now EU trade negotiations and ratifications in the EU member states, that will take time that the UK economy cannot afford to wait around for. And meanwhile, all Starmer has to do, bear in mind, if that happens and the UK is having a bad economy, he can just turn around, blame the Brexiteers, blame Nigel Farage, blame the Conservatives for putting the UK in this mess, for making promises they knew they could not keep, that would not come true. Like, once again, we are seeing the big criticism of the Trump presidency, of Trump and his entire team, does not seem to think that other countries won't react the way that they think they will. So, an influential article is, of course, now being currently circulated amongst Republicans and is by pro-Brexit UK economist Shaka Shingham. You may remember we've covered him in the past, who was in Washington for the inauguration on the UK Changing Europe website. It is, of course, questioned whether dynamic realignment can actually work for the UK and the EU because they have now two fundamentally different approaches. It said, in a system where the UK is now being pushed to align with what was a fundamentally pro-competitive one that unleashed economic growth, even at the cost of divergence, would now far outweigh any harm. However, if the EU system is now the EU system is actually anti-competitive, leading now to wealth destruction, then the harm far outweighs the divergence cost. Why do you think we're suddenly all going to change and just leave that? Again, look how it's referring to the EU. Anti-competitive, wealth destruction. The EU is doing all right. But again, you can remember, these are free market fundamentalists. Remember, because line don't go up, it must be a bad economy. But the EU isn't doing too bad. So I've been saying this for the longest time, that once Trump gets in, which he now has, we're going to now be pushed back to back into Europe. It's inevitable. And if Starmer is smart about this, remember, he can just turn around and just absolutely just shellac all over not only the Conservatives, all over the Brexiteers. You could absolutely defeat Nigel Farage by just saying, oh yeah, remember all the promises Nigel made about Brexit, this, and this? Well, we cannot do this because if we did that, these would be the consequences to you in the UK. And he could say whatever he wants and all this, but all you just say is, Nigel Farage is encouraging to put our country over a barrel, encouraging Trump to do whatever it wants. And this puts the NHS at risk. It puts all kinds of stuff at risk, your jobs. There is so much stuff, so much stuff they could go on the attack over on this. But it would be a big move. It would be a very, very big move. I think, as I said, this year is going to be a very big year for Brexit. So we'll see what happens in the negotiations. I've said before, Starmer doesn't actually have to say anything of what he wants until he walks into that room. Remember, we've got two very, very big pro-rejoiners, which is why the Brexiteers have lost their minds over the appointment of these two people. First of all, the guy who is going to be the main guy in charge of negotiating with the EU. We've also had Ollie Robbins return as the guy in charge of the charge of the civil service at the Foreign Office. We covered that not too long ago. Putting all these very pro-Remain people in charge at the in very important positions, I think speaks volumes. Speaks very, very big volumes about the direction that Labour does want to go. They ain't going to be begging, I think, cap in hand to Mr. Trump. We're just going to get pushed back into the EU. And Trump is potentially by saying this type of stuff, by these types of comments coming out, probably even more further facilitating this, move even faster. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, this year going to be a very big year when it comes to Brexit. So as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.